Okie doke, I have completed my full deep dive into using Flask as well as TypeScript um, in a Vercel deployment. I saw this question while I was looking for an answer, and it still looks like you guys have some questions. And I did the work. I did the deep dive, um, and here's everything you would ever need to know about hosting Flask functions as the backend um, to a Next.js app. Um, this is the Next.js Flask starter. There's also the Flask Hello World, which doesn't have any front end. It's just an example of straight up just running Flask backend. Um, and it uses like a Vercel.json uh, workflow, whereas this template doesn't. This is doing a rewrite to the Flask hosted from the API server. You can read all this, and you probably have. If this is a question you've had, you've probably done this deep dive. I did it. I got stuck on it. Here's the answer as far as I can tell. So the big takeaway for me, the big wow factor, is that they are hosted from the API folder by default. When you go to deploy, you will get it will look through the API folder. I think it's also looking for route.js, and exposing those as functions, because you can see we have a node.js right here from the API node folder, which shouldn't be there. It's not. That's from an older deployment. Ignore that for now. But you can see we have these routes hosted from the API. It parses the app level API folder for Python functions, so it seems. And these can be actual files, these can be apps, Flask apps, or they can be exposed HTTP servers. For example, like this is the example they have on the website. This whole thing, by the way, is the very closely resembles this right here. Like I downloaded this. I just added. Let's see if this is my local host. Yes, I just added a couple buttons for testing purposes. Let me actually make it go live to exhibit all my points. So here's let's show you these buttons real quick. We just have 4 buttons. One of them is making a call to API Python. And then if we go over here to the API, we have an index folder with an API Python path in it. Ignore everything. This also works with cores. I don't know why I was testing that, but whatever. We have an API path. This needs to begin with API as far as I can tell. I think that is essential because this folder needs to remain named API. Now I'll expand on this in a minute. But as far as I know, roots still need to begin with API is in my testing. And so this index file exposes an app with a root app API, or API Python. And all this is doing is returning, and then we're printing that response to the console. So when I click this, we get a hello from Python in index.py. Now, the question is how you get Node running the same way, or Node running in the same environment. As far as I can tell, I thought you had to do some kind of rerouting. If you don't already know, in the next config, to make this work locally, you are rerouting requests that start with API to basically check the local server. And in your package.json, we're actually launching not just the next server, the next dev, but we're also pulling up the Flask, and it is looking for this file in API/index. Again, you can change this to be whatever you want. This is just the path to this index file. You can change that. However, Vercel itself, again, is looking for this folder to be named this. I tried renaming it to Flask to fix a problem that I didn't actually have, because the reality is this route still works. The API folder inside the app will still work. I had thought that this would be rerouting and causing issues, but no, it works locally and in deployment. So if we go here, double check that this is running. Beautiful. just going to reload this to be safe. We're going to get a hello from API node when I hit this, because this is routing to, let's double check. API Python is the first button, API node. So this is actually using regular file routing. They work the exact same way. And it also takes precedent, because if I were to add the path here, API node, the identical path to the app routed path here, let's save this, let's relaunch it to be safe. Yeah, added the exact same path, so this one says hello from, or hello API from node in index.py. Reload this, make sure we're chilling. If I hit this, we're still gonna get hello from API node, not the index.py. But if I go move this back out of here, we should, God, it'd be really funny if we don't though. This should start routing to the Python. And it does. Okay, so we're gonna get hello from index.py. So you can just absolutely go ahead and use both. I'm gonna move that back into here. However, this is kind of confusing to have a master level API and this, so I've been kind of, I've been renaming this to like server, and then putting all my, node, there's a root in there. And so in here, you could just change this to server. And then, yeah, this says API still, but that shouldn't matter, because if I go here, yeah, we should be making requests back to the typical called server in here. And I do want to point out, again, you can also use these as just straight app routed inputs, because you'll probably notice there was an HTTP in the deployment here. There it is. There's an HTTP root. You can also just name the file and expose in /API. If it's just a HTTP request, like this should say hello from API/HTTP. And then if we go to the deployed one, we'll get a slower one, but there it is. So that's coming from the HTTP. And then you can also, another detail is that you can also expose multiple Flask apps. If there is an app exposed anywhere in these files, it'll catch it and interpret the root. So you can put these in separate places, and this should, yeah, hello from the other one. Now the downside with doing this is that, of course, you would have to, if you wanted to test this locally, you would have to set up to also run that in your package.json to, in the same way that this is running API index to start that server. You'd also have to do that and kind of do it on a separate port, and then have to worry about actually like routing it to the correct local host. It's complicated and dumb, but it is an option. As you can see, API, the other one, this one is exposed, and this has its own app. So if this will work in deployment, as you could tell, but I'm pretty sure if I go to localhost here, reload this, and try to do this, yeah, this isn't gonna work because there is no running server at this, but there will be in deployment. Anyway, that's it. The answer is you just can. To answer your question, just move this API, move your Python stuff. Make sure you're either going to use this, like the actual root path. So it would just be /API in your source, and then call it root and expose it via HTTP, or put it in a file. Make sure that's the file that's being run for local development purposes, and just expose an app and give it a root. No big deal. That made total sense.